Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of Charlotte Mecklenburg History with Dan Morrill. Today is Sunday, November 29th, 2020, and I am Dan's daughter, Mary Dana, and I'm here with Dan through Zoom. He is holding a doll right now. He said the first thing he's going to do is talk about this doll, and then he's going to go into the other things that he has to discuss. I don't even know what the topic is today. What is it, Dad? Just a
Well,
hodgepodge?
I'm going to be talking about non-whites in
Okay.
Charlotte, Mecklenburg history.
People of color.
More specifically, no, that's not accurate.
Oh,
Non-whites, other than those that spoke English or German, that had an influence on the development of this area.
okay.
All
All
right.
right.
All right.
Okay. So tell me about this doll that you're holding.
Well, look, I'm going to be spending a lot of time talking about indigenous people of this area,
Hmm.
otherwise known as Native Americans or otherwise known as Indians. And I wanted to show you this doll because this doll is 82 years old. My wife's mother, my mother-in-law, your grandmother, bought this on her honeymoon. And
Oh,
she bought it in Pennsylvania. And my wife, Mary Lynn, looked it up and it's worth several $100s. These are no longer made. They haven't been made for a long time, and they used to be very popular. But let me tell you, I think it's a good way of sort of giving you an introduction to some myths about Native Americans that are still very, very widespread. One is, and I think probably one of the most common is that when the when white folks came here, when Europeans came here in the 1500s and 1600s, there wasn't anybody here. Or if there was somebody here, they were, you know, savages. They were just, that's what they were. We don't know exactly how many Native Americans were in what we now know as the United States when the first Europeans came, but it was certainly in the millions. And it was probably somewhere between 40 million and 100 million.
yeah, it's a
There
lot of
were
people.
people all over the place. So this by no means was an empty place. It was not a wilderness. Now, the issue of how long these people had been here, that we don't know exactly, but we think it's probably in the $13,000 to $15,000 range.
You mean years?
1,000 range year. 13 to 15,000 years they've been here. Now, just think about that, Mary Lynn, Mary Dana. I'm in all kinds of trouble today. Mary Dana, just think about that. 13 to 15,000 years.
That's a long time.
Now, there are all kinds of theories about how they got here. The most commonly held is that they came during the Ice Age when the world's temperature became very, very cold, when glaciers came over and much of the world that does not have glaciers today, and actually formed an ice bridge across the Bering Strait between eastern Siberia and Alaska. And what brought human beings here was that they were just following game. And when the game walked over the ice, they walked over the ice and said, "Oh, me, we're somewhere new." And they spread from there across all of North America, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean islands. And of course, that obviously took them a long time to get here, but they got here. Now, another very common misconception, as I've said about these people. Well, there are actually two primary myths you find about that white folks had about these Native Americans. One was, as I've already suggested, that they were savages. I remember going, when I was a little boy, going to John Wayne Westerns. And all the Indians, all they did was fall off horses when white people shot them. I mean, they were all bad. They always have this very somber music come on whenever there'd be some Native American on a Mustang would come up on top of a ridge, and you get this bomb, 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 terrible music. So they were terrible, horrible, horrible people. The other thing that was commonly held was that if they weren't savages, then they were naive and innocent. They were almost like
Children.
children. Yeah. Well, the reality was that these were human beings with all the difficulties, all the foibles, all the assets, all the liabilities. They lived, they loved, they were born, they died, they had all of the aspects of being human beings. So, but it's interesting that they've always been pretty popular in the trinket business, like my lady here, and she's really rather impressive. She's really rather impressive. So I'm going to spend a good bit of time on the Native Americans, not exclusively, but I'm going to do that. And now I want to share my screen, Mary Dana, and I'm going to, can I do that? Can I find
You
that?
should be able to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Here I go. And this will be a way, then we'll get to the thing. And this will be kind of good for the people to see. And if this doesn't work, then we'll just start all over again, right? Okay. No, that's not right. Can you see my screen?
No.
No. We're gonna have to start all over again.
Well,
Nah, man, don't get irritated. Wait a minute. All right, here we go.
come
Here
on
we go.
now. There you go.
Here we go. There you go. I'm getting there.
I say I knew you could do it. You
Can
do it
you
every
see it?
week. So
Can you see it? Can you
it's
see it?
usually you don't do it when we're on camera. Yes, I see your screen.
All right, now this will be good for everybody because they'll know how to get to this crazy thing once I do this. Wait a minute, let the old man. You know, I'm half blind, so.
No, that doesn't
Okay,
help.
I got now. The website I go to all the time for all this stuff is wepreservemecklenburg.org. If I can see excuse me, Dana, I can't see because I've turned off the lamp so that I
Yeah,
don't
why is your lamp off?
mad. Well, I don't know why is anything off.
It's pretty dark.
Hold on.
Unless it was dark in your room.
Hold on, I'm not going to worry about whether you can see me or not.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
I'm going to turn on this lamp a minute. This is informal. Now I can do it.
Well, that's fine. Just leave that lamp on.
We preserve. Okay, now. All right, here's that website. I'm going to go right to here. And I'm going to go down here to here. And here I am, okay?
Okay.
All right, now we're going to start talking about Native Americans, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now, we're talking about Mecklenburg County, so I wanted to give you the one really significant site. We actually have more, but this is by far the most dramatic site, and they're all archaeological sites that we have of Native American presence in Mecklenburg County. This is a Pluton. That's Pluton. It's the largest exposed Pluton in Mecklenburg County. There are many, many Plutons in Mecklenburg County. A Pluton is igneous rock. Now, igneous means that it was formed by fire. Of course, when the earth was forming, it was fire. It was just very, very hot. And plutons were crystallized stones that basically were created below the surface of the Earth while the Earth was cooling in its very early stage of development. This one happens to be granite. So when this was first formed, it was under the surface of the Earth. But and of course, it's literally billions of years old. I mean, this Pluton's billions. Did you hear that, Mary Dana?
Yes, billions
Billions of years
It's
old. Over the eons, many, 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 many years, water, because this is right on the edge of a creek, erosion has exposed what used to be under the earth. So that's what this is. That's what it is. It wasn't created by volcanic action. It was literally created by erosion. Now, this Pluton is worth your going to see. I think you have seen it.
I have.
Now you see there's a gentleman standing on the top of that Pluton. Now, when I took this picture many years ago, I purposely had him go up there just to give you scale of this Pluton. Now, Mary Dana, what's your reaction to seeing that Pluton? Do you have any reaction at all?
I noticed there's graffiti on it.
Yes, that's human nature. Human nature, they just can't help it. Although, quite frankly, then this was privately owned. It's now publicly owned. It's
Oh, is
actually
it?
a place that you can visit. There's a park that I'm going to show you the address, and you can go to it. You could literally get in your car this afternoon, put on your mask, do social distancing, and you can go down and see this rock. Now you see
It's
this
impressive. It's big.
It is really big.
Mm-hmm.
Now you'll hear it called. Sometimes it'll be called the Big Rock.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it called Big
Some
Rock.
people will also call it the Providence Rock because it's in the Providence, the upper Providence. It might be lower Providence. It's one of the Providence communities, historic communities of southern Mecklenburg County. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is. Let me show you. Here's the address, which it's the Big Rock Nature Preserve, and it's off Elm Lane, 6500 Elmstone Drive. So those of you good people out there who watch this podcast, I tell you, truly, I mean, this would be a wonderful place to take your children, because
that's true.
If they go and see this and think about this, we did an archaeological dig at the Providence Rock back in the 1980s. We found evidence of human habitation 7,000 years ago. Now, if you go down Elm Lane behind Stonecrest Shopping Center, where basically that's where this is, and people are running around worrying about what they're going to do Friday night. And then you think about the fact that human beings were here 7,000 years ago.
I think it was a meeting place, wasn't it?
Well, it was, because it had three things. First of all, it had water. Now, this is 4 Mile Creek. Now, 4 Mile Creek runs just to the north of this. And I'll give you a little bit of story about this rock. I got called about this years ago because this was a designated historic landmark. And it is a designated historic landmark. I got called by the highway department. They wanted to put 485 right through this thing.
Oh, gosh.
And I said, well, it's a designated historic landmark. And the reaction of the gentleman that I was talking to, I'm sure he was a very nice person. He said, well, what's there? I said, well, there's a big archaeological site. And his basic response was, well, who cares?
Mm-hmm.
Well, again, remember that what the preservation business is essentially into is trying to save artifacts, things that tell us about the past. And you know, I was talking about these people that were at the Stonecrest Shopping Center worrying about Friday night.
Mhm.
These people are doing the same blooming thing. I mean, now this thing had three things. First of all, it had water. In fact, in addition to the creek, there's a perennial spring. Perennial means, by the way, long lasting, indefinite period of time. There's a spring near the rock, so you could get water here. You know as well as I do, Mary Diana, human beings will die of thirst before they die of hunger.
Right. It's
We
true.
are mostly water. We have got to have water. So the presence of water was a very big factor, plus the fact that down just below the rock was a 4 Mile Creek. Secondly, particularly 7,000 years ago, and certainly 13,000 years ago, this was not a woodland. This during the ice age, during the glaciers, when the glaciers came so far south, this was steppe land. This was prairie land. There weren't many trees. So if you got up on top of this rock, you had a great vantage point. You could see a long way. So of course that was a very important factor. And then there's a third thing that this had, and that was it had shelter, because there are natural crevices and stones piled on one another on the big rock, so that you could actually go and get in and out of the rain. And of course, you build a fire in there, it could be a little bit cozy, you know.
Mhm.
So it had shelter, it had a vantage point, it had water, and also, as you suggested, it had it was known to people that if somebody's going to meet somebody, where are you going to meet them now? Now we might say, well, let's meet at Walmart,
Mhm.
whatever. Well, they say, let's meet at the Rock. Well,
Yeah, let's meet at the big
these people
rock.
would know that. These people would know that. So, you know, that and here's the thing about these Native Americans. When say in the year 1500, there were no white people here in what we call the United States in 1500.
Mhm.
The first man that ever brought an expedition into the southeastern United States, who was Spanish, was Hernando de Soto, and that was 1539. The first permanent Spanish settlement, in fact, the oldest settlement of a European in what is the United States, was Spanish. It was St. Augustine, Florida, and that was 1565. And I'll talk about some other Spaniards that penetrated this area as well. All of the land of the United States, all of the land of the United States belonged to the indigenous people. Now, obviously, they were broken into various tribes, and they were broken into various uh, linguistic groups, and they were not a quote unified country by any means whatsoever. But all the land belonged to Native Americans. Today, as far as land that is under the control of Native Americans, it's approximately 1%. And those 1% are essentially Indian reservations. Now, you know, here in North Carolina, the Cherokees have a reservation at the end of the Blue Ridge
Mhm.
Parkway. And of course, they've also got a big casino up there. But they've gone from 100% to 1%. And also, all the people who lived here were Native Americans. Now, say Mecklenburg County has a little over 7,000 Native Americans, which is less than 1% of the population. So I mean, let's face it, the Native American people have been absolutely pushed aside.
Mhm.
And it's one of the real dilemmas of our history. You know, people want to be proud of their history and proud of what they're about and proud of what they're doing. But these Native American people simply got, well, they were in the way. They were
Forced out.
in
They were
the
forced
way.
out.
You can read things about, you know, some of our great heroes, George Washington. Read some of his statements about what they ought to do with Native Americans, or Thomas Jefferson. Read what Thomas Jefferson had to say about Native Americans. Basically, they were to be killed if necessary to take their land. I mean, that's what happened. And you know that the American Revolution was significantly caused by the fact that the British government drew a line along the apex of the Blue Ridge Mountains and the mountains of the, you know, the watershed between of eastern United States, and said no white people were to go beyond there. And of course, that didn't very well suit with the colonists. They wanted to go and penetrate that Indian land, and that's exactly what the American Revolution was certainly significantly about. So there is no way to sugarcoat, to wash, to say, you know, they deserved what they got. All right. Now, coming up to the time of the contact between the first whites and the Native Americans, the people who settled Mecklenburg County were largely English speaking people. Most of them are Scots Irish. In the old historic element of Mecklenburg County, there were some Germans, and I'll show you an example of part of their architecture in just a minute. But obviously, over the thousands of years that the Native Americans had lived here and had been here, they had evolved a very sophisticated culture. And you know, many of the things that we take for granted now. Let me just list some things that Native American culture had that was basically made available to the Europeans for the first time. Tomatoes,
Mhm.
potatoes, pumpkins, turkey, chocolate, and a whole lot more. Okay. So these people were, by the time that the white people really began to come into what's now Mecklenburg County, which was in the 1700s, first as traders and then as settlers, the Native Americans of this region had evolved into what is called the Eastern Woodland culture. And if you want to see, and of course, Eastern Woodland tells everything. They were practicing agriculture. Their primary crop, the crop that was really fundamental, in which they also have given us, is corn.
Mhm.
Large corn cultivation was very, very important. They had relatively few domesticated animals because they didn't have. You ever tried to domesticate a deer? Or
No.
how about trying to domesticate a buffalo? You're not going to do it. Now they domesticated dogs. They had dogs. Dogs are basically descended from wolves. So they had dogs. In fact, the first Indians that the settlers at Plymouth saw in 1620 when they came to Massachusetts, they saw two Indians and a dog walking down the beach. In fact, that beach is called First Sight Beach. And just for the record, yes, Native Americans did eat dogs. Now, that's not all they did. You know, dog meat will sustain you. So, you know, dogs were important to them, but and more than just for protection, they were good sentinels, so forth and so on. But they had evolved a substantial, sophisticated culture, and they lived basically in the forest, because by the time that the settlers came to Mecklenburg County, this was woodland. It was a great woodland forest. Now this
By the way, you've been talking about 25 minutes.
that's fine. If I
I'm
don't
just
get,
I'm just letting you know.
I know I'm not going to get through this. And are you finding this worthwhile?
Sure, I like hearing about that. I mean, I think it's a part of Mecklenburg history that county history we don't talk about much.
Listen. Can you imagine talking about the history of this region and not dwelling on Native Americans? Now, let me say something about that. There's one, and I'm going to talk about this building here. It is true that at least the Native Americans who lived in the United States did not have a written language. There were some script among the Mayans, but they're, of course, South America. But they had no written language. But that didn't mean they were stupid. What it meant was that they passed on knowledge by oral tradition. Some of the most important people in a Native American village were storytellers.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they would teach the history and the story and the background and the religious beliefs. And by the way, they had a very animistic religion, in the sense that they believed that everything had a spirit. Deers had spirits, trees had spirits, everything had a spirit. They believed in a, to say the least, they believed in a polytheistic world. They also, and this is certainly one of the symbols of civilization, they had ceremonial aspects for burying their dead, for example. They lived, of course, in extended families, but they did, they had marriage. I mean, they had a sense of loyalty of man and woman. A lot of, attention played to child rearing, and, gender roles were very specific. They did a lot of hunting, did a lot of fishing, did a lot of farming. In fact, one of the things that many people love to collect are arrowheads. Now, arrowheads, of course, the bow and arrow and the arrowhead was simply a principal means of hunting, the weapon that was used. Now, this is at the Shield Museum in Gastonia. They have a replica of a more or less typical structure that the Catawba Indians lived in, who were the tribe that essentially the early settlers encountered. And you can see it's a building, circular roofs, got a hole in the ceiling, which you can't see because they're going to build a fire in it. And of course, I've got another picture down here that shows the interior. Right here, you can see it's basically simply these long rods that are bent over, and then of course it's covered with bark, and that's how they live. Now, almost all of the settlements and the villages that evolved, and certainly this was true when the white people encountered the Indians, they lived in villages. There would be several of these huts, houses. Some of them would be what they call a longhouse. It'd be a bigger house. Maybe several families would live in it, kind of like a dormitory. They would frequently have a burial house where they buried the dead. They'd have some sort of a temple or meeting house where they would have these ceremonies, because they had a human culture. They were almost always on a stream, because they did not use a wheel for transportation. They only had three ways really to carry things. They could either carry it drag it, or they put it in a boat. And of course, we know canoes, dugout canoes is what they use. Well, obviously, of those three, the best is for using a boat. And there was widespread communication and trade. I mean, they traveled a lot, going to other tribes that had, for instance, one of the things that was particularly desired was the Yupon, the leaf of the Yupon plant, Youpon, because it was the only source of caffeine because they had no coffee.
Mm-hmm.
Coffee comes from Africa. They had no coffee. So it was the only, and also they would use it in, this is going to sound a little bit indelicate, but it's just a reality. They also would have purification rituals where they'd want to purify their bodies, and they would drink a tea made out of this Yupon leaf, concentrated, and it would make you vomit. And the idea was as they vomited, they would be getting the bad stuff out of their body. So there was a lot of trade back and forth. Now, if in a but really, you can go see the Providence Rock, and I would really, really recommend, for heaven's sakes, folks, you don't have to get on an airplane; just drive down there and see the sucker. And as I say, I showed you the entrance. It's a park,
Yeah,
the nature
nature
preserve,
preserve.
run by Mecklenburg County, and you can kind of see the path going by. You can walk. It's an easy walk. You
And the
walk along.
Shield Museum, that's in Gaston County in Gastonia, but they have a nice exhibit
They
for
do.
devoted to indigenous people of the area.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Town Creek Indian Mounds because
Oh yeah, that's interesting. I've been there
that's
too.
really now
Mm.
this was a culture that impacted a broad swath of the eastern United States between about 600 and 1400 in what they now call the Common Era. You know, they don't use AD and BC anymore.
Mm-hmm.
They use before the Common Era, BCE, and the Common Era. But so when you talk about the Common Era, that means, you know, since the year 000, whatever. Anyway, this is near Mount Gilead, North Carolina. Go out Albemarle Road. You can Google this and see it anytime. It is a fascinating place because this was part of what was called the Mississippian culture.
What county are the Town Creek
It's
Indian
in
Mounds in?
Montgomery. It's in Montgomery County.
Montgomery County, right?
In
Town Creek
Montgomery County.
Indian
You go up to
Mounds. Very
Albemarle,
interesting.
you go up to Albemarle, which I think is Highway 27. Isn't that right? You go up Albemarle and you cross the PD River and you turn right after you get across the bridge, and it'll take you to the Town Creek Indian Mounds. I mean, it's a few miles back there, but it's within a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Now, this Mississippian culture was very sophisticated and very widespread. How am I on time?
About 35 minutes.
Well, anyway, this is a state historic site. And I think, from my own perspective, if I was going to take my child to any state historic site and I wanted them to understand, you know, the real realities of being human, that they're different cultures, they're different beliefs, I would take them to the Town Creek Indian Mound.
I agree with you. I agree.
And this is the only public site in North Carolina that speaks. There are other mounds in North Carolina. These people were known for the fact that they built these mounds. Now, they're really like pyramids, but they didn't build them out of stone, they built them out of dirt.
Mm-hmm.
And as you can see, they would put a building up on the top of these mounds. Now, they had a hierarchical structure. In other words, there was a call him a chief, a king. It was very patriarchal. Call him a chief, a king, a prince. I don't care what you call him. But one of the ways that you would signify that he was very powerful was that he lived above everybody else. So they put him up on one of these places. It's also where they had their ceremonial moments. Now, actually, I don't think this is going to work.
The inhabitants of the town
Yeah, I can hear it.
part of a new cultural Indian tradition that emerged in the Carolina Piedmont in the 11th century. These Indians, called the PDs by archaeologists, gave rise to complex societies that lasted until the 1400s. Producer Derek Long traveled to Montgomery County to visit North Carolina's oldest historic site.
Town Creek Indian Mound in Montgomery County is North Carolina's oldest state historic site.
Both in the history that we interpret and the fact that we've been open to the public longer than most of the other sites in our division.
The history interpreted here traces the occupation of this area by different Native American groups for over 12,000 years. But the main focus here is on the group known as the PDs, a part of the South Appalachian Mississippian culture that was different from the typical cultures of the Piedmont tribes.
The PD or the Mississippians are what made this site famous or special because of the large mound that they built here, kind of a marker that makes it stand out against other archaeological sites in the area. What we refer to as the PD culture moved into this area about 1,000 years ago. These people were farmers. They moved into a large floodplain area, which was great for farming, and established a town here, which grew over time. It was a village. It was a county seat of sorts. It was a place where people lived, where people traded goods. People met for government affairs, for religious activities and celebrations.
The reconstructed village sits along the banks of the Little River.
We have the townhouse, which is the building on top of the mound. And that building served as a public space for both political meetings and religious activities.
These are reconstructed buildings here.
Which sits over by the Little River. And that building is not complete. It's not finished. And that allows us to talk about construction techniques, how these people built their homes.
The third structure in the village houses an exhibit explaining the culture's burial practices.
The archaeologists estimate that there are roughly a little more than 500 burials at Town Creek. Most all of those burials have not been excavated.
In the museum, a film and artifacts tell the story of what we've learned from this archaeological site.
One of the unique things about the PD culture is the way that they made and decorated pottery. It's a way that we can tell one cultural group apart from other groups. And these people were creative. They would carve designs into these paddles, and then they would pat their clay pots with it and pressing a pattern into the clay before it had dried.
An important event here was the annual week-long busk, or green corn celebration.
But at the beginning of the celebration, there were purification rites that had to be completed, and one of those was the drinking of the black drink. The black drink being a tea of sorts that's made from the yopon bush, a coastal shrub. So we believe these people either traveled to the coast along the PD River or traded with coastal tribes to procure the leaves, make the tea, and drink it as a medicine. Unfortunately, the way this medicine works is it upsets the stomach and it causes one to vomit. After that, it was time to celebrate. They enjoyed themselves for the week, and then at the end of the week, the priest would go into the townhouse on top of the mound where there was a fire kept. This was a sacred fire that burned year round.
During this week, the old fire was extinguished and a new fire started.
And before everyone left from Town Creek to go back to the villages to prepare for the winter, they would get embers.
Well, I'm gonna leave it there. You can certainly go to We Preserve Mecklenburg, and I actually labeled this page African American because that's the last group I'm going to talk about. But I could go on and on, which I know I don't have time to do. But what I'm going to talk about next week, I'm going to talk about the Spanish, because they had a tremendous impact. And I would simply put out a little teaser that the man who had the most impact in bringing what we now call Latinos into the United States was a native of Mecklenburg County. So, it's all about trying to understand the full story of the complexity of people who made up the history of this area And one of them, and boy, we could go on and on about the situation with the Native Americans.
Absolutely. It's interesting to hear about the indigenous people of the area. And I absolutely agree that it's worth a visit to Town Creek Indian Mounds. I don't know how their schedule and hours is being affected by COVID. I'm sure you could go to their website and look it up, but it's worth a trip out there at some point for sure. So thanks for being with us today, everybody. Thanks, Dad.
Oh, remember, you get this because of Preserve Mecklenburg. A boogie, boogie, boogie. You
Yes,
do.
please support Preserve Mecklenburg. We always
And-
ask you
and
for that.
you remember whoever.
Okay, yeah, my
And
grandmother's
there she is.
doll.
There she
So
is. She's 82 years
anyway,
old.
yes, I see that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, all right, everybody, thanks again, and we will look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.